My boyfriend and I lived in a bridge tunnel when we were at our lowest, and we even picked through the trash. Later, he bravely saved a girl from her boyfriend's bullying, but the boyfriend injured him and he was sent to the hospital. The boyfriend was very rich, and with the compensation money, the two of us gradually entered high society. Just as we were about to get married, the girl he had saved suddenly appeared, disrupting our wedding. The bodyguards tried to get rid of her, but my boyfriend stopped them. The wedding went on, but I noticed that his gaze kept falling on the tearful girl in the audience. 5 years after the wedding, he mentioned divorce many times. The last time, I agreed. Today is New Year's Eve. I looked down at the WeChat messages and knew that GNZ would not be coming back. Many people once said that the stupidest woman is the one who accompanies a man through a difficult business startup. I originally thought that GNZ was a special example, but I didn't expect that over time, he would become an example to support the argument. I deleted his WeChat and signed the divorce agreement he had left on the coffee table. Just as I finished signing, I heard a noise from the entrance. I looked up and saw Hiroshua leaning intimately on GNZ's arm. Hiroshua was the girl GNZ saved 5 years ago, and I never expected that since then, GNZ had completely changed. He no longer cared about me, nor did he care about me. Even when Hiroshua wanted to claim her status, he told her with red eyes that he married Shin Huiwei only because she had taken such good care of him during his hospital stays over the years, and because she had worked hard with him to create such a wealthy family. If it weren't for those reasons, he would not have chosen to marry her. I don't know how many people these words passed through before finally reaching my ears. I think I was probably the last person to know what was in his heart. This morning when he mentioned divorce, I agreed. GNZ lowered himself and took a pair of plush slippers from the shoe cabinet and placed them at Hiroshua's feet. Hiroshua's hand naturally rested on his waist as he bent down to change his shoes, and they looked more like a family. However, the days when GNZ treated me like a transparent person still made me feel stung. I took a deep breath and called out to him, "GNZ, I need to talk to you." He didn't seem to hear me, and his hand movements didn't stop. Hiroshua, who was standing next to him, gave me a provocative smile, then nudged GNZ and whispered, "Wei is waiting for you." GNZ then glanced at me out of the corner of his eye, put away the tenderness he had shown earlier, and asked coldly, "What is it?" I glanced at Hiroshua behind him and lowered my head. I had something I wanted to say to you alone, but he interrupted impatiently, "What can't be said?" "Xiao Shui is not a stranger," he said. Hiroshua's face instantly turned red when she heard this, and she angrily slapped GNZ's face lightly with her hand. I wasn't in the mood to watch their interactions anymore, so I just pushed the divorce agreement on the coffee table over. Seeing this action, GNZ frowned, a little unhappy. "Is this another trick?" I froze for a moment, remembering that he was probably talking about last month. On our wedding anniversary, I saw the photo he posted in his circle of friends, which looked like a vacation on an island abroad. In the photo, he and Hiroshua were smiling happily at the camera, a smile I had never seen before in our marriage. So I sent him a joke message, telling him I agreed to a divorce. He was so happy that he forgot himself and didn't even suspect the truthfulness of the words. He flew back to China overnight. The first thing he did when he came in was to throw the divorce agreement prepared by the lawyer in front of me. I gave a wry smile. This time it was for real. "GNZ, we're over." GNZ stood there without moving, his sharp gaze sweeping over me, as if he wanted to look into my heart. Hiroshua took a few steps forward, bent down, and picked up the agreement on the table to examine it carefully. Pointing to the division of property in the agreement, she said, "Why does it have to be 50-50? I remember that after you got married, it seems that you didn't contribute much to the company, did you?" Seeing that Hiroshua had crossed the line like this, and GNZ still didn't object, my heart fell to the bottom of the pit. I turned cold and said sternly, "This is between my husband and me. When did you get involved?" Hearing this, Hiroshua immediately put the agreement on the coffee table with a pained expression. Tears welled up in her eyes as she said, "I was just asking, no hard feelings." I didn't expect Weiwei to get so angry. GNZ couldn't stand it when Hiroshua cried, so he immediately took her into his arms, while scolding me. "Shin Huiwei, what's wrong with you? She only asked one question, and you're so angry about it?" I wanted to argue back, but seeing Jianzi's sudden anger, I felt like my throat was stuck and I couldn't say anything. Looking at his nervous expression, I suddenly remembered Jianzi before I met Hirushue. Back then, even if I accidentally broke the skin, he would feel heartbroken for days. I know that this heartache and love have not disappeared, they have just been transferred to someone else. I don't know what went wrong either, that has brought us to this. I gathered my thoughts and handed him the divorce agreement on the table. After all, I have been with you for so many years. The division of property in the agreement is very reasonable. Jianzi was distracted and knocked the divorce agreement out of my hand. I don't want to talk about this today. Upon hearing this, Hirushue, who was leaning against him, immediately became unhappy. She pouted her lips and asked in a distressed voice, "Why? She has already signed it, isn't this what you have always wanted?" "Yes, isn't this what you've always wanted? Now why don't you mention it again?" Ji Yan lowered his head and comforted her patiently, his tone full of affection. "Have you forgotten why we came back?" Hirushue shook her head to indicate that she hadn't forgotten, and told him to go quickly. Ji Yan walked towards the stairs, and I think I understand why they came back. Probably to come back and get their passports to travel abroad again. Just like last year. But this time, the result shouldn't be that I'll be left at home alone. After Ji Yan resigned, Hirushue looked at the table full of food, then looked at me again with a sarcastic expression, and her previous gentle image was gone. "Sister Weiwei, I'm really sorry, Yanji insisted on taking me with him on the trip abroad. I couldn't refuse either. You've been married to him for so many years, and he hasn't taken you out, has he?" Seeing that I didn't say anything, she held out her hand for me to see the ring on her index finger. "Yanji gave me this ring, and I already said that I didn't like it, but he insisted on giving it to me anyway. And emerald rings of this size are not easy to find on the market." Hearing her brag non-stop, I suddenly felt a little annoyed. I interrupted her, my tone clearly mocking. Indeed, there are not many people who repay kindness with hatred. Seeing her face turn for a moment, my depression eased slightly. However, I was not able to gloat for long, as the angry voice of Jianzi came from the stairwell. "Shenhuiwei, shut up." Before the words had finished, Jianzi walked quickly up to me and took Hirushue behind his back. "I've told you many times not to bully her, can't you understand? I've only been gone for a short while and you've started again." His expression was cold, and there was a hint of anger in his voice. I tried to defend myself. "How can you say I'm bullying her?" Hirushue pulled his sleeve, appearing to be very reasonable. "I'm fine, we can go now, otherwise we'll miss the plane." Her eyes were triumphant and provocative as she spoke, as if to tell me that no matter what I said, he would not believe me. Jianzi was finally appeased, and they walked out the door holding hands. Before the door closed, I heard Hirushue ask discontentedly, "Why didn't you sign it? Aren't you afraid she'll change her mind?" Before the door closed, I heard Jianzi say, "Be good, it's New Year's Eve, let's not talk about these unpleasant things." As I looked at the closed door, I was still very resentful. It took 7 years for him and me to go from having nothing to now being able to spend money like water. All these years, he always said that he wanted me to take care of my health, and let him handle all the big and small matters of the company. In fact, he gradually took over the power in my hands long ago, and now I have completely become an executive with an empty shell. I can no longer participate in the big and small matters of the company. This is also the reason why I don't want a divorce. How can I have the opportunity to enjoy such things when others have already done the hard work for me? Even if Jianshi is determined to benefit Hirushue, I will try my best to stop it. Early the next morning, I booked a morning flight to Pingqing. I have wanted to visit here for a long time. When I was young, I had no money, and when I had money, I had no one to keep me company. I rented a room here, and on sunny days, I can see the magnificent snow-capped mountains. The landlord, Lin Su, is about the same age as me, and he always speaks with a faint smile. Most of his houses are in remote places, and it is now the off-season, so I am the only tenant. He heard that I wanted to climb the snow-capped mountains and told me that the recent snowstorm had caused all mountain climbing trips to be cancelled and that I would have to wait until the weather improved before I could reschedule. I had been preparing for this climb for half a year and was a little disappointed. However, he suggested that if I wasn't in a hurry, I could stay here for a while. There were many other interesting places to visit besides the snow-capped mountains. I actually didn't have much to do. I didn't need to worry about work and my husband was with someone else. On the first day I stayed here, I watched the snow fall with him in the doorway all night. I asked him embarrassedly to find me a reliable mountain guide, even if it was expensive. He thought for a moment, nodded, and then pulled out his phone to look through the contacts in his address book. At that moment, the phone in my pocket suddenly vibrated. I took it out and saw that it was a reminder from the operator about an overdue payment. After paying the bill, 3 new messages popped up from GNZ. The first one asked why I had deleted his WeChat. The second one asked me to go to the drawer in the study and find a black file, check the content and send him a photo. Where is the person? Don't pretend you can't see it. I deleted the 3 text messages so I wouldn't be bothered. I also blocked his number. After living in Pingching for half a month, the hiking trails were finally reopened. Lin Su became my guide for the past 2 weeks, showing me the sights of Pingching and the surrounding area. I wanted to pay him, but he shook his head and refused. He was very gentlemanly, and in fact, it was not quite accurate to describe him as a gentleman. He had almost no common shortcomings of men, and his gentle personality and courtesy towards others made him perfect, satisfying the fantasies of many women about their ideal partners. On the night before our hike, Lin Su still did not recommend a guide to me. At that time, I was watching a variety show with Lin Su in the living room while eating dinner. I couldn't wait any longer, so I asked him about finding a guide for me. Lin Su took 2 guide certificates out of nowhere and placed them in front of me. Then he glanced at the equipment in the corner and said, "I'll be your guide tomorrow." As soon as he finished speaking, a bell rang outside the courtyard. Lin Su put down his bowl and went to open the door. A few men came in, embracing 2 people. As soon as I saw the 2 people clearly, the chicken leg in my hand froze. Isn't this Ji Yanzi and Hiroshua? Why are they here? When Hiroshua saw me, his eyes widened instantly, and his hand, which was clutching the hem of his shirt, tightened. Wei, why are you here? Ji Yanzi also froze for a moment when he saw me, and all the emotions on his face were revealed at once. He was silent, his eyes flashing with anger, a sneer at the corner of his mouth, his face looking very ugly. I crossed my legs and put the chicken leg in my hand into the bowl, pretending to be confused as I looked at the 2 people in front of me. Who are you? Lin Su asked one of them with some confusion. Qin Yu, what's going on with you guys? A man standing next to Ji Yanzi hurriedly cleared his throat and said, "We a few took a job and came to be their guides." I heard you took a job recently, let's go together. The others agreed. Following Su Gu, the success rate is really high. Hearing what they said, Lin Su's team did have a good success rate. I let out a sigh of relief and looked up to count the people standing behind the 2 of them. I couldn't help but ask, 2 people, why do you need 6 guides? Before Ji Yanzi could speak, Hiroshua spoke up first. Yanzi was worried that something would happen to me on the way, so he hired a few guides to ensure my safety. Besides, we've brought so much equipment, someone will always need to carry it for me, right? Hiroshua leaned happily on Ji Yanzi's shoulder, completely unaware that his gaze was always fixed on me. Clearly, Hiroshua is very important to him. I nodded lightly, no longer feeling annoyed for him as I had before. That night, I was organizing my equipment in my room when I suddenly heard someone knocking at the door. When I opened the door, I saw Shishu with a smile on his face. He handed me a raincoat and told me that he saw that I didn't have one in my equipment and had brought it specially. The weather on the mountain can change unpredictably, so this equipment is very important. I felt embarrassed at my carelessness and hurriedly thanked him for his thoughtfulness. Not long after Lin Su left, the door was knocked on again. I thought Lin Su had something else to say, but when I opened the door, it was Ji Yanzi. I frowned and tried to close the door, but he directly pushed it open with his knee and then locked the door behind him. Faced with his sudden approach, I instinctively tried to avoid him. Before I could react, he suddenly pushed me, and my back hit the wall hard. His gaze was serious and cold, and he held me tight by the shoulders, preventing me from moving. For half a month, I heard nothing from him. He wasn't at home, my WeChat account was blocked, he didn't reply to my text messages, and his phone was always busy. Living with a man? Eating together? What's next? Taking a bath and sleeping together? Shen Huaiwei, have you forgotten that you're already married? I just want to laugh at the absurd things he says and does. I look at him helplessly and say with a hint of amusement, are you trying to tell me that I have a family and must follow tradition? Mr. G, you really are forgetful, so I need to remind you. We are divorced. And there is nothing between Lin Su and me. He is the landlord and I am the tenant. We are just having normal dealings. Do you think everyone is like you? Don't make people feel uncomfortable anymore. Ji Yanzi's expression at this time was a little scary, but I ignored the pressure and continued, saying, besides, didn't you wait for 5 years for the result of the divorce? I've already signed it. What more do you want? Do you have to push me to this point to be satisfied? He suddenly let go of me, his anger on his face disappearing, and he turned away, unwilling to look at me anymore. I rubbed my shoulder, which hurt from being squeezed, feeling a little helpless. His voice was actually a little shaky. I didn't want anything to happen to you. I have already said this many times when he was in danger. At that time, he was lying in the intensive care unit and the daily treatment cost was as high as 20,000 yuan. For us who were living in the dark basement at that time, this was a huge sum of money. Soon, the court verdict came out. The second generation of the family paid 63 million yuan in compensation, including some subsequent subsidies for nutrition. At that time, Ji Yanzi only had half an hour of lucidity every day. When he learned that we had received compensation, his reaction was unexpected. He repeatedly pushed away the food I handed him and tried to make a noise to get me to leave. I understood what he meant. 3,630,000 yuan is more than most ordinary people could earn in a lifetime. That's what I thought at the time. He hoped that I could use the money to live freely and not spend a single penny on him. But I didn't want to give up on him. When I was about to take the bank card to pay a bill, Ji Yanshi knocked over the congee on the table. He said, Shen Huaiwei, why are you being so unreasonable? Who asked you to interfere? I don't love you anymore, you know? Take the money and go. Even though he told me to leave every day, I never gave up on him. The day I was discharged from the hospital, I could only sit in a wheelchair. The long-lost sunshine shone on him, and he suddenly shed tears. That year at the hospital entrance, he held my hand tightly and said seriously, Shen Huaiwei, we must be good from now on. 5 years after we got married, he changed, becoming irritable and tired. In order to get a divorce, he had said some hurtful things and treated me coldly. I had tried to hold on, but he interrupted me helplessly. Now I heard that he actually hoped that I was doing well, which was really unbelievable. I gathered all my thoughts and said coldly, please leave my room immediately. There was another knock on the door, and Lin Xuan said gently, we can almost leave. I replied, okay, and, carrying the prepared equipment on my back, I walked past Ji Yanzi. After all, this was the first group to go mountain climbing after the opening. The weather on the mountain is unpredictable, and even the experienced Lin Su is not sure if there will be any accidents. The worst outcome is to return to the starting point. After only a short while, Hirushua began to complain about wanting to rest. The guides, who had been patient from the beginning, became a bit helpless and began to smoke and look at the scenery. Ji Yanzi looked at Hirushua's whining expression with an expressionless face, and in a tone of voice that was rarely impatient, he said directly that if it didn't work, they would go back. Upon hearing this, Hirushua's tears were about to fall, and she resolutely stated that she would not go back. I followed Lin Su. When he saw Hirushua lagging far behind, he used the walkie-talkie to inform Qinyu to pay her more to find a horse so that she wouldn't delay the group. After a pause, he looked at me, and I immediately shook my head to indicate that I didn't need it. I had started practicing climbing stairs and jogging half a year in advance for this hike. Although I was a little out of breath now, it was within my tolerance range. The pace over there was fast, and soon the horsepackers caught up with their horses in tow, and we continued on our way. I gradually got used to the altitude and kept up with the pace of the group. After 4 hours of hiking, we finally reached the base camp. From here on, the rest of the way could not be done on horseback. Hiroashua sat down on a large stone and complained about feeling unwell. She had a headache, needed to breathe oxygen from time to time, and her legs hurt. I kindly advised her that if she couldn't bear it, she could choose to return now. At least she could still ride a horse on this part of the journey. Upon hearing this, Hiroshua's face immediately changed. She said, "I know what you're thinking, but I'm not going back." Looking at her almost crazed eyes, I felt helpless. I couldn't persuade her with kind words, so I let her be. Anyway, she had hired 6 guides, so the worst that would happen was that they would take turns carrying her up the hill. After dinner, Lin Su reminded them of a lot of precautions. Towards the end, Hiroshua became a little dissatisfied and asked, "What's the point of saying so much? I paid so many guides just to reach the top. If I can't reach the summit, then what's the point of spending so much money?" As she spoke, I glanced at Jianzi. Hiroshua really is spoiled by him, and she is increasingly not taking others into consideration. Jianzi kept his head down, not knowing what to think, and his fingers tapped his leg unconsciously. I knew that he was probably very annoyed at the moment, and only a small spark was needed to set off his emotions. After all, we have been together for many years, and I know every little move he makes. Lin Su ignored Hiroshua and continued to explain the precautions. After she finished, she walked over to me and reminded me to go to bed early that night, and that we would start the ascent after breakfast at 3 a.m. The next morning after breakfast, I noticed that I had lost almost a third of my oxygen tank and energy bars. Looking up, I saw that Hiroshua's bag was significantly fuller. I reached out to stop her and demanded that she return my things. She widened her innocent eyes and said softly, "Sis Weiwei, can you please stop being unreasonable? When have I ever stolen from you? I know you don't like me, but you can't frame me." Of course I didn't believe her, so could you show me the stuff? Hiroshua handed the equipment to the guide standing behind her. "Why should I let you see it? I already said I didn't take it if I didn't take it." I suppressed my anger and said, "All my supplies are marked. If you have a clear conscience, you can open it for me to verify." Jianzi heard a noise and came over immediately. His face wasn't looking too good. He looked at Hiroshua's backpack and after a moment of contemplation, he chose to support Hiroshua and said that I had given her the equipment. The implication was that I had wronged a good person. I turned to look at his backpack and noticed that Jianzi's backpack was still bulging, showing no signs of having been dented at all. I didn't expect Jianzi to protect her like this. Without energy bars and oxygen, I would be in danger if I reached the summit, and he should have known this. But he still chose to protect Hiroshua. I was filled with rage, trembling with anger. So I didn't hesitate to give Hiroshua 2 loud slaps. Hiroshua was stunned by my attack and even forgot to cry for a moment. She charged at me and we fought. I was not to be outdone and grabbed her waist and threw her to the ground. It happened so fast that no one had time to react and Hiroshua fell heavily to the ground. The 6 guides were annoyed by her torment and each looked for an excuse to leave the scene. Just as I was about to step on her, Jianzi rushed forward and took the blow for her. I had used all my strength for that kick, and even Jianzi couldn't help but let out a muffled grunt. In the end, I still didn't manage to reach the summit of the snowy mountain, because Hiroshua had called the police. I sat in the police station and took a slow sip of the hot tea. Jianzi frowned as she explained the situation to the police. Hiroshua was exaggerating, and the young police officer reminded her not to interrupt the recording officer. Hiroshua reluctantly shut up. After explaining what happened, she was about to speak again. The young police officer turned to her and asked, "What is your relationship with this Mr. G? Are you his girlfriend's sister, or his legal wife?" Hiroshua had not been able to obtain the title of Mrs. G for so many years, and now Jianzi had not signed it, so legally we are still husband and wife. She would never admit to being a mistress or a third party. Seeing her stammering, the older policeman next to her changed the subject. I didn't say a word the whole time, just calmly asking for cup after cup of hot tea. Hiroshua was anxious when she heard that Jianzi intended to not pursue subsequent responsibilities. Why should we swallow our anger? She was the one who started it. Jianzi seemed a little annoyed and interrupted Hiroshua's next words. "I said that if I said I wouldn't pursue it, then I wouldn't. This matter has passed, so let's not mention it again. Since meeting Ji Yanzi in Pingcheng, he seemed to have changed a lot. I didn't want to delve into the reasons behind his actions. After walking out of the police station, Ji Yanzi caught up from behind, grabbed my wrist tightly, and pushed me into his car. The door slammed shut, blocking He Rishua's disappointed and angry voice. It took about 5 hours to get from Pingcheng to Haicheng, and the atmosphere in the car was suffocatingly tense during those 5 hours. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out and saw that it was a message from Lin Su, coming home for dinner tonight? It looked like I wouldn't be able to make it back. I was about to reply when Ji Yanzi snatched the phone away from me. He stared at the message on the screen, his fingers holding the phone tightened, his face full of anger. How dare you use this as a reason to get a divorce? Because of this guy? I put the phone back in my pocket, suppressed my anger, and formally asked him a question. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and you need to answer truthfully. He didn't answer, so I took it as a yes. Do you want a divorce? He didn't want to admit it, but he nodded. Over the years, every time you mentioned divorce, did I try to stop it? His thoughts began to become blurred, and it seemed that he was a little uneasy. I'm doing what you want now. Why are you dissatisfied again? Ji Yanzi clenched his lips tightly, his beautiful thin lips quivering slightly, and his eyes revealed unwillingness and remorse. After a long time, he said like a request, "Don't divorce, I beg you." I looked at him in disbelief, feeling that these words should not be said by him. I have wronged you all those years. I am willing to admit my mistakes. Please don't leave me. I will cut off all contact with her, and from now on I only want to live a good life with you. I remember that he also said this on the day he was discharged from the hospital. Not long after, He Rishua barged into his life. She approached him on the pretext of gratitude. At first I didn't pay much attention to it. After all, trust is the key to getting along with each other. But as they met more and more often and their relationship became closer and closer, I finally realized that He Rishua's intentions were not pure. So I decided to use marriage to keep Ji Yanzi by my side. But He Rishua made a mess of the wedding. When she appeared at my wedding in a wedding dress, my heart went up to my throat. I was really afraid that Ji Yanzi would shake my hand off. Although Ji Yanzi was taken away by the security guard, she still had a place at the banquet. When the MC was reading the wedding vows, Ji Yanzi's gaze was no longer on me. At that time, Ji Yanzi and I were both at the peak of our careers. We were both orphans, so most of the guests at our wedding were colleagues and friends. On that day, almost everyone witnessed my embarrassment and He Rishua's madness. After the wedding, their interactions became even more frequent. This made me feel very uneasy, so I started arguing with Ji Yanzi. I poured the tea he had just bought into the pot and boiled it before pouring it away, cut the suit he was going to wear to the meeting tomorrow, and smashed everything in the house that could be smashed. He looked at me and asked me how I could have become like this, and how I could be unworthy of being his wife. But I remembered that during the hardest year of our lives, he shouted his wish out to the sea, that he must marry Shen Huiwei and buy her the biggest and brightest diamond ring in the world. And now, he just looks at me as I fall apart, his face full of disgust, with no other emotions left. Can't you be more considerate like He Rishua? I'm tired from work every day. Can't you understand a little? I've been living like this for 5 years. I even found out the reason why he married me from a few celebrities chatting at a banquet. Look at her face, it's so tired, it really embarrassed President Ji. No wonder President Ji didn't want her as his dance partner. He and Ruoshua really complement each other. How can they compare to her? I don't understand why President Ji married her either. In fact, if she hadn't accompanied Ji Yanzi for so many years, people would gossip about them if they separated, so Ji Yanzi had no choice but to marry her. You can't say that kind of thing. Who said those words? My boyfriend heard them with his own ears while drinking. After that, she took out her phone and played the recording. Hearing Ji Yanzi's voice say those words, my anger instantly exploded. After I got home, I kept questioning Ji Yanzi whether those words were true. He pulled at his tie impatiently and asked, "Now that you know the truth, do you want a divorce?" Then he took out a divorce agreement from the drawer and slammed it on the table. If that's the case, just sign it. From that night on, I never argued with him again. When he told me this, I felt nothing But I didn't want to let him and Hiroshua off so easily. In my mind, a plan for revenge against them gradually took shape. After a while, I looked at Jianzi's eager eyes and suddenly laughed. Okay, but I have two conditions. From that day on, it seemed that the roles of Jianzi and I had been reversed. He used to always ask me to prepare a cup of warm milk before he went to bed, but now it was him who put the hot milk on my bedside table. Seeing him with a slightly servile smile, I glanced at him indifferently and then a playful smile appeared at the corner of my mouth. I'm actually lactose intolerant. As soon as the words left my mouth, his face immediately changed, and I realized that I was sorry. I will pay attention next time. In the end, I told him with a smile that it was Hiroshua who liked to drink milk before going to bed, not me. After that night, no dairy products have been bought in the family. In the meantime, Lin Su asked me what to do with the luggage I left in Pingching. I thought about it for half an hour and finally decided to transfer the rent for 1 year to him, and I will keep the room I live in. I still plan to go back and live there. After I finish things here, I'll of course have to go, at least to finish what I didn't get to do last time. I sat on the sofa and felt for a cigarette. I'd just found my lighter when the doorbell rang. I put the cigarette in my mouth and opened the door immediately after seeing the person outside through the peephole. Leaning against the doorframe, I teased, "That was quick. I thought no one wanted to take you back to Haicheng." Hiroshua glanced at me, then pushed past me and rushed in, shouting, "Jianzi, how could you leave like that?" But when she saw Jianzi, who was busy in the kitchen, her voice got stuck in her throat. Since I married him, Jianzi has never entered the kitchen again. I took out my lighter, watched the flame lick the cigarette butt, took a deep breath, and watched them playfully. Jianzi served the dishes to the table, and the look in his eyes when he saw Hiroshua instantly became wary. "How did you come? Didn't I make it very clear to you? Don't come bothering my wife and I again." Hiroshua had never seen Jianzi like this before. She shook her head in shock and backed away, immediately using her trump card, tears welling up in her eyes. Watching her tears fall like broken strings, I couldn't help but feel a little amused. Are tears really a universal weapon? If tears could solve problems, there would be no more failures in the world. Jianzi's face fell, and she said, "Don't use tears to test my soft heart anymore." Hiroshua froze, and when she looked up, tears glistened in the corners of her eyes, and her nose was red. Her acting was just right, and it made me a little moved. I patted my head and pretended to be enlightened. "So, Miss, he came to pay back the money this time?" Hiroshua froze in place and asked, "What money?" I didn't answer her. Because when she said this, I knew that Jianzi had still spared her some face. That day in the car, I made two simple requests. The first was for him to completely sever ties with Hiroshua, preferably never to have contact again. The second was for Hiroshua to return all the money Jianzi had given her, including the red envelopes of money and the jewelry and luxury goods he had given her during the holidays. At the time, he had agreed very readily, but at the moment, he looked a little guilty and his eyes avoided mine. Hiroshua has not worked for many years and has been completely dependent on Jianzi for support, with no income at all. I looked at Jianzi, and he said sheepishly that I hadn't had time to tell her, and it wasn't intentional. I stubbed out my cigarette and walked under the coffee table, putting the previous divorce agreement back on the table. I sat on the sofa like a big shot and said, "Jianzi, you know, last time in the car was the last chance I gave you. If you don't cherish it, then you can't blame me for being ruthless. Sign it?" This scene seemed to overlap with every moment before when he forced me to divorce. Jianzi really looked panicked. He took off his apron and walked up to me. His voice trembled a little. "Are you really not going to give me this chance?" Hiroshua seemed to feel that there was hope for a reconciliation. The tears from earlier had disappeared. "Sign it, who cares about you?" Jianzi ignored Hiroshua. His gaze was fixed on me. I knew that as long as I gave him a little hope, he would not sign. Unfortunately, my resolve was very firm, and I was determined to get a divorce. Jianzi could see my determination, and his tears could not be stopped, but he could only sign his name word by word. I got up, put the agreement away, turned around and went upstairs to start packing my clothes. I had no intention of keeping this house. According to the terms of the agreement, I had to move out. As I was carrying my luggage downstairs, Jianzi blocked my way. He said, "You stay, I'll go." Without looking back, he quickly left. Hiroshue gave me a fierce glare before hurrying after him. Soon, the sound of a car's engine could be heard outside the door, and the surrounding area returned to its usual quiet. The moment I stepped out of the civil affairs office, I felt an immense sense of relief. The matter that had been troubling me had finally been clarified. Jianzi seemed to have something else to say, but at that moment, a car slowly pulled up in front of me. It was Lin Su. Yesterday, I said on WeChat that I had to take a plane to Pingqing. Lin Su said that he could drive to Haicheng to pick me up. I joked that the service at his homestay was really good, with a pickup service included. He was silent for a long time, and finally just sent an emoticon. Before getting in the car, Ji Yancher finally said what he had been wanting to say. It was just 3 brief words: "I'm sorry." He was sorry not for the current me, but for Shen Huiwei, who had accompanied him in the basement and lived a frugal life back then. I cannot accept his apology on behalf of the person I was 5 years ago, and I don't want to. Because he owes me this. When we returned to Pingqing, Lin Su asked if I still wanted to go back to the snowy mountain. I looked out the window at the scenery and nodded firmly. The road is closed for now and won't reopen for another month. I'll still be your guide. I nodded in agreement. Before we left, a familiar face arrived at Lin Su's homestay, Yenin, a mutual friend of Jianzi and I. He looked a little surprised when he saw me, then nodded politely and asked with a smile, "Are you also going with Lin to climb the mountain?" I nodded. "How have you been recently?" "Quite well." He was silent for a moment, then said he hadn't been well. I didn't react at first, then realized he was talking about Jianzi. I casually said, "No way. He got the girl and still isn't well?" Yenin didn't care about the sarcasm in my words. "After you left, many of our previous partners terminated their contracts one after the other, and our stock price plummeted, resulting in heavy losses. His career is at a low ebb right now. Hiroshue is unable to help him, but she wants to be famous, so the relationship between the two of them has reached an impasse, and neither one of them is willing to take a step back." I'm not at all surprised by these results. When we first discussed collaborating, I accompanied the partner to drink until I vomited, and I even had stomach bleeding before I signed the contract. Does she really have that kind of perseverance? Even if she does, her previous remarks have offended a lot of people. Once, she relied on the support of Jianzi and was very arrogant towards all her partners. Did she ever think that this would happen to her? Yenin kept talking about the difficulties Jianzi encountered, and I roughly understood what he meant. I interrupted him directly and told him that I had divorced him and all our assets had been divided equally at the beginning. If he is short of funds, he can sell the few houses in the suburbs. There is no need to say this in front of me. Now all the money in my account is what I deserve, so don't expect me to help him. I made it very clear, and Yenin completely shut up and didn't speak to me again until we were hiking. But so what? I wasn't going to see him again anyway, and some things just had to be said. While hiking, I accidentally sprained my leg. Lin Su was very worried. "Should we continue?" I looked up at the towering snow-capped mountains and nodded with gritted teeth. His gaze lingered on my face for a long time before he looked away. I said, "Okay, I'll support you." When we actually reached the top of the mountain, the wind stung my face. Lin Su hung the mountaintop medal around my neck and took a photo of me on top with his camera. It was easier going up than coming down, not to mention the fact that I was limping. Several times I lost my balance and almost fell, but fortunately Lin Su caught me in time. In the end, he carried me down the mountain. Back at the homestay, he frowned as he took out medicated wine to rub on my bruises and said, "Shen Huiwei, you're too stubborn. Your leg is swollen like this and you still want to reach the top." I shrugged nonchalantly and said, "I can't give up halfway, can I?" He used his warm hands to rub my injury and said, "You are too headstrong. Why don't you try to find someone to rely on?" I suddenly remembered a previous failure. It is better to rely on yourself than on others. Only yourself is the most reliable. He screwed on the cap of the medicated wine bottle and avoided my eyes. "In fact, you can rely on me, and I won't let you down. If Shin Huiwei had heard those words back then, she would have been embarrassed for days. But I was already 27 years old. Over the years, I had experienced many setbacks and betrayals, and sometimes I even wondered if I was just particularly unlucky. But then I came to understand that the problem wasn't that I was unlucky, but that the people around me weren't trustworthy. Lin Su seemed to be waiting for my answer. I looked at the moonlight spilling onto the ground and said softly, "Let's talk about these things later. The answer is in time, and time will reveal everything."